I'm cutting down some spindles and I'm using the first cut as the guide for the rest of the cuts. I'm going to need 4 of these little square wood blocks for each tray. I'm using my air nailer once more to attach the feet, and I'm using 2-inch nails. And this is just going to take the nail in about a half an inch into the tray. I'm doing 3 nails per foot, and that just works out really well. I'm just checking here to make sure that I didn't go all the way through, and it didn't. I got lucky with this one. I did try going from the top down, but that was just a little bit more difficult because I really couldn't tell where the foot was when you're looking from the top down. So I decided to just go this way, and I'm just double checking each time to make sure that my nail isn't going through. I'm back inside and I'm going to use some of this folk art home decor antique wax in the color brown, and I'm going to use that to stain 2 of these trays. 3 of them are going to be painted white, but I already showed you that part in my previous video for the tray, so I thought I would show you this way instead. I'm going with the grain of the wood, and I'll just apply the wax until I get the depth of color that I want and just blend it in using the sponge. I'm using this large farmer's market stencil that I got at Joanne Crafts when I was there in Miami, and I'm thinking we're looking at 4 or 5 years ago already. I'm going to use the same kitchen sponge and some white paint. This is just the same latex paint that I used to cover the window box. Now, I did end up going a little heavy-handed on this, so I'm just picking up the stencil to check if there's some bleeding happening, and yeah, there is a little bit. But you know what? It's supposed to be rustic, so I'm not going to worry about it. And who doesn't love a good reveal? So I thought I would share that with you because I really love being able to peel it back and look at what is left. I love it. For the second tray, I decided to switch out this stencil and I'm using this one that says fresh produce, locally grown, organic. This is another stencil that came in the pack with the farmer's market from Joann's. Again, using my sponge and the white latex paint. This one had some larger letters, so it was a little easier to stencil and I didn't get as much bleeding. The handles that you see here are something that I thrifted a while ago. They came with the screws, so it'll be perfect. I'll be able to attach these to the trays. I'm just using some Rust-Oleum 2x paint and primer in one in a flat black to spray paint the handles. I've marked where I need to drill my holes for the handles, and I'm using the Hoto drill again. I did not have to charge it after I used it the last time, so it's holding its charge really well. You can see that I went up and down a few times. I just wanted to make sure that that hole was nice and clean. I like to flip the trays over and go through the backside of the hole with the drill as well, just to make sure that it's nice and clean too. Any little chips that come off, I'll just touch those up with some black paint. And as you can see, I painted the bottom of my tray and the feet with some black paint, and I'm just going to leave it that way. I really love how this tray turned out, and I hope you like it too. It's been quite a while since I shared how to make some tiered trays. So I'm going to use these 2 wood pieces that came off of a dog toy that I picked up at my local dollar store. I'm going to use this miter box and clamp these in. Isn't this the coolest miter box? It's so old. It's something that my stepfather had at the cottage and I had to bring it home because look at, you can clamp in your wood pieces and then you don't have to hang on quite so hard to them. I'm going to use my little hacksaw to just cut right through this, and then I'll do the same for the other one. For the bottom part of the tray, I'm using this 8x10 frame that came from my Dollarama store. It has a really nice chunky frame to it, and you can see that here, and it's a natural wood color. And I just thought making something with a natural wood color and not painting anything would be a nice change. So I'm just going to remove all of the stuff in the back, but I'm going to keep it all intact because I will be replacing it. I glued the frame backing to a piece of cardstock that has a wood grain finish. And now that it's dry, I'm just going to take my craft knife and very carefully just cut out the paper. This is the scrapbook paper that I chose. I thought it was a nice complement to the frame. I'm going to keep the glass, so I'm going to just go ahead and insert everything back into the frame, and that will make this tiered tray really nice and sturdy. The glass will also be really easy to clean. I'm going to use Weldbond glue to glue the feet onto the frame. Now the frame is just in there with those little clips. So after the Weldbond glue has dried, I'm going to come back and reinforce that cardboard. This is a frame that I repurposed last year for Christmas, and I put some little trees in it and made it a little bit of a snow globe effect with these little silver glitter balls that are going straight in the trash. Using a screwdriver, I'm just pushing out these little cardboard pieces that were nailed into the frame, and that's what gave it the shadow box effect because these pieces prevented the backing from going all the way onto the glass. So now I'll be able to pop out the glass, and I'm also going to remove those little clips there because I don't need them. Using this handy little razor scraper, I'm just going to be cleaning up the backside that has some glue on it. I'm also going to take this little scraper and scrape all of the paint off of the glass from this frame. I repeated the same process, adding the scrapbook paper to the backing. And now I've set the glass and the backing back into the frame. This time I have to secure it with some hot glue. I'm also going to use some of these tumbling tower blocks that you can get at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to glue one in each corner once I'm done gluing the boards down. This is going to just give the glass some extra support and make sure that it doesn't fall out. Now that the feet have set up, I'm going to run some hot glue along the frame and the cardboard backing just to make sure that there's a little bit of extra security. I was going to use the tumbling tower blocks, but they would stick out too far and you'd be able to see them, and I didn't want to do that. So I'm just going to use a generous amount of hot glue on all four sides. So sticking with the natural wood look, I found this at the thrift store. I don't know what it is, but it looks like a spindle to me. So what I'm going to do is just trim off the very top part because it's too tall for the size of the boards that I'm using. Again, I'm using this handy dandy little miter box, and this time I'm going to use a hacksaw and just saw my way through this piece. I've centered this out, and I'm just marking 4 little dots on either side to make sure when I'm ready to glue it down that I put it in the right spot. I'm doing the same thing on the small frame because this is what I'm going to be gluing first. This is how I assemble my tiered trays. Sometimes you would think that it would be easier to put the large piece on, but I wanted to make sure that I could get this centered as well. Again, using my Weldbond glue because this gives me a permanent hold. I'm going to just set it down in the spot where it needs to be and then put it aside and let it dry. It's been about an hour and the glue is good and dry and set. So I'm going to now attach the two pieces together. I've got my 4 dots that I marked out earlier, and now I'm just going to place it down and then make sure that I have it completely straight. Tiered trays usually have some type of decorative piece at the top. So I found this little piece of wood in my stash, and it was perfect because it had the same color as the bottom part of the spindle. So I'm using my Weldbond glue again and finding the center and setting that aside to dry. I'm going to start out by making the tiered tray. I've got two terracotta saucers in different sizes. I've got a thrifted little glass that it's hard for you to see, but you'll see it shortly. And I'm going to take some white DIY chalk paint and water it down a little bit. I want to give these a whitewashed look. I'm going to give the bottom of this saucer one coat, not too thick, just with my brush once right all the way around. I'm going to be leaving some of the bottom open because that's where I will be adding the little glass for the tiered tray portion, and I like those to be on natural products and not on top of paint. Sometimes I just don't have luck gluing on top of paint. The paint dries really quickly, so I'm going to just mist down this little rag and I'm going to rub off some of the paint, mostly in the edges, that kind of thing, but I do want a little bit of that terracotta to show through in a few spots. So I'm just going to continue doing that until I achieve the look I like. Here you can see I didn't add enough paint, so I'm just adding a little bit more to make it look sort of even all the way around. Both of the pieces have dried, and you can see that the large saucer also has a raw spot. That will be for where I need to glue the glass onto that part. I'm taking my stencil brush from the Dollar Tree and some clay chalk paint from Martha Stewart Vintage Chalk Paints, and I'm just dragging a little bit of color all the way around the saucer. Using the same rag, I'm just going to go over this paint. I want it to blend in. Terracotta pots don't have a distressed brush stroke kind of look. They are more blended, and this way it just will make it look more natural. For the additional pieces, I'm using 3 of the napkin rings from the Dollar Tree and this thrifted glass, and I'm going to be spray painting them with flat white paint. To attach everything together, I'm using my Starbond medium consistency glue. I love these glues. It comes with an accelerator, which makes everything dry lickety-split. This glue is a medium consistency, so it's a little bit thicker than their original thin set glue. And this gives you a little bit more working time, which is really great. Now, what I should have done is put a pencil line around where my glass is going to sit, but I'm just kind of eyeballing it, putting a good amount of glue on. Then you take the accelerator and you spray the other part of your project and then put the two together. I like to give it an extra spray with the accelerator if any of the glue is on the outside, and that hardens it within about 5 seconds. And you can see here that I'm able to lift this up, nothing moves. I'm just checking it to make sure that it's nice and sturdy. For this project, I'm starting off by painting this 18-inch wood round. I got this from a local Facebook Marketplace seller who sells all sorts of different sizes. I believe this 18-inch round was only $12, so I was really excited to find a whole bunch of them for not that much money. Anyhow, I'm going to give it a couple of good coats of my DIY chalk paint in white. I also put some spindle feet on them and I glued that with my Weldbond glue. Now, while I wait for the round to dry, I'm going to take this vintage hardware. This came off of an old dresser that I have, and I keep the legs, the knobs, everything, you name it. Any wood that's salvageable, I keep it because I know at some point in the future I will probably need it. I'm just going to give these a couple of coats of black chalk paint. I don't need these to have full coverage because I know they're going to get scratched off, but I am going to seal them afterwards with some clear matte spray. I'm going to put this stencil on it. It's all in one piece. I got a pack of them from Joanne Fabrics quite a few years ago. There are a couple of missing pieces down at the bottom, but I'm not going to put any paint on those letters and I'll fix them by hand later. I'm using a makeup sponge and some medium gray chalk paint. I wanted this to have a little bit of a different color rather than just white and black. And the makeup sponge, I'm making sure that I offload the paint because I don't want it to bleed. It did in a couple of areas, but they were really easy fixes with a little bit of white paint. Even though I'm obsessed with tissue paper printing and I love using my Cricut, this is still so satisfying to be able to peel up that stencil to show this beautiful design. I've measured out where the handles are going to go, and instead of leaving the handles standing up, so instead of putting a screw down at the bottom and having them raised up a little bit, I decided to just lay them flush. They're more for a decorative piece anyway, so I'm drilling some holes a little bit bigger than the pegs of the handles, and I'm just going to use my Weldbond glue to glue them in. They sat nice and flush against the tray, and I'm really happy with the result of these handles. And of course, it needs some distressing, so I'm just taking a little chip brush, going around the edges the way I like to, just pulling in from the edge, giving it a little bit of darkness on the corner of the edge, but also a little bit of a feathering effect coming through. I'm going to do that all the way around, and I'm also going to kind of add a few little darker splotches or more splotches, not to make it look like enamel, but just to make it a little bit more rustic and maybe it's worn off a little bit there. Then I'm going to take my chip brush and very lightly drag it across the whole of the letters and everything just to make it look a little bit not so bright white. I really hope you enjoyed my Timber Tuesday projects today. If the second project I have for you, I think turned out amazing, but you'll have to let me know what you think. I'm taking two pieces of scrap wood and I've cut them in similar sizes, but of course, one smaller than the other. So the first thing I'm going to do is just give them a coat of my Rust-Oleum chalk paint in the color Cocoa Bean. I was lucky enough to score a beautiful bed frame on the side of the road, which I took apart and I've got a whole bunch of different pieces. And that's what I'm going to use to create the tiered tray that I'm working with right now. I'm going to just put these two pieces together. They're going to become the top spindle of the tiered tray. So I'm just going to hot glue those together, and wood on wood with hot glue stands up really well. And then the other thing I'm going to do is glue a little half round wood bead to the top just to cover up the hole in this top piece. I gave the wood look area at the top of this piece a couple of coats of the cocoa bean chalk paint just so it would blend in a little bit more with the rest of it. I'm going to give both of these wood pieces two coats of a DIY chalk paint. It's just white flat latex house paint with some talc. And if you're interested in the recipe, I have it listed down in my description box. I usually mix up a big jug of it and then I'm set for quite a while before I have to make another batch. One thing I like to do is change the direction of my brush strokes on the second coat. That just helps to give me more even coverage. So I'll do a vertical stroke on the first one and then flip the board around and do another vertical stroke or a vertical and a horizontal stroke, however you want to call it. Just switch directions for your second coat and you'll get much better coverage that way. I've got 4 of these wood riser feet that are going to be the bottom of my tray, and I'm just going to pre-drill a hole for the screw. I'm going to do that for all 4 pieces, plus the middle section that's going to be the support for the top and the bottom. You'll want to have your drill bit a little bit smaller than the size of your screw because then it'll have some grip when you're screwing it in. Otherwise, it'll be too loose. I could have used a smaller one for this, so I did have to use a little bit of glue in a few spots to make sure that it would stay secure. To attach the riser feet, I'm going to be screwing from the top of the board all the way down through the board and then into the riser holes that I pre-drilled. So here I'm just marking out where I want them to be. I'm going to mark about an inch in from the side and the top, and then I'll have them set in the same spot in all four corners. I'm using a piece of scrap wood underneath my board to make sure that I don't drill into my desk, but also it will let me know when I'm all the way through the wood. I'm going to screw the screws in almost all of the way. I just want a little bit sticking out of the bottom so I have an easier way of getting it in the right hole on the riser feet. Then I can just place the riser foot right into the little part of the screw that is sticking out and finish screwing them together. I should have added a little bit of wood glue to all of these pieces because I did have one that was a little bit loose. So I would suggest doing that. Add a little bit of wood glue or some type of glue. I am always using my Weldbond glue, and that will just give you an extra secure hold. I'm also sinking the screws in a little bit farther down so they're really into the wood good and they don't stick out too much. I've flipped it over and now I'm starting from the bottom and putting a screw in through to the top because this will then support the middle spindle post that I need for the tray. It's really easy to get these two pieces together because I've got the pre-drilled holes in the spindle. I'm going to repeat the process for the top level of the tray, which is the smaller piece of wood. I'm going to put a screw right through it and then attach it to the spindle. Using a screwdriver, I'm just pulling away some of the paint on the very top level. I'm going to just use my Weldbond glue to glue the top spindle in place. The glue will be sufficient because there isn't any support needed for this. It's just a decorative piece. Using some fine grit sandpaper, I'm just going to sand around the edges and the corners of all the boards just to pull off some of that white paint and show the brown underneath. That's the reason why I painted it brown. I wanted that reveal to have a blending effect with the spindles because I'm leaving the spindles their brown color as well. I wanted to camouflage the screws on the bottom shelf, so I'm taking some of these half round beads and I'm staining them with a dark walnut gel stain. I'm going to add the beads just using hot glue and placing them right on top of the screw to hide it. I'm going to do the same thing on the top. I am over the moon in love with this tiered tray, and I think this one's definitely going to be a keeper. Today I'm using some springform pans to create an enamel look tiered tray. You'll probably recognize some of these pans. They're used to make cheesecake because the bottom pops right out of them. There's a latch that allows the bottom to just open up and then you've got your cheesecake all set to go. So what I decided to do was paint these white. So I have this larger one at the bottom. I had used this for a different project earlier. That's why it has those little bead feet on the bottom of it. I'm using my Rust-Oleum linen white chalk paint and I'm going to give everything 2 good coats. I started drilling a hole on the bottom, but then realized I needed a larger drill bit. So I'm using this 1/2-inch spade drill bit to go through this bottom wood piece that was attached from a previous project. It's just going to give the tray a little bit more sturdiness. If you've ever experienced working with springform trays, that bottom is a little flexible. So I wanted it to be nice and sturdy for this tray. I'm going to be using a little dowel, but which is actually the handle of a foam paintbrush. I always keep them. If the foam brush is no good, you can just unscrew it and throw the brush away and you've still got a nice little piece of dowel. This is going to help support the centerpiece that is going to be the stand part of the tray. Using my hacksaw and miter box, I'm just going to cut the dowel piece in half. Can you all guess what this is from? It's actually a rolling pin. I took off the handles. This was something that is available at my local Dollarama store for $4. I had previously stained it, but now I'm just going to paint it black. The paint I'm using is just black acrylic paint and some baby powder, which makes it into a chalky finish. I'm also going to paint one end of one of the half pieces of dowel because that part is going to be sticking up a little bit on the top part of the tray. These pans are perfect for creating an enamel look because they have a rim on them already. I'm going to use the same paint and a makeup sponge to apply the black all around the rim of each of the pans. I like using a makeup sponge because you have a lot more control than with a paintbrush and you never get any drips. I'm also going to paint the hinges and all of that hardware black. Since this bottom pan already had some feet on the bottom, I didn't need to add anything, but I am just going to paint them black so they match in with the theme of this tray. Now comes the fun part. I'm going to assemble this and cross my fingers that it turns out the way I have it pictured in my head. I think it will. I'm tapping these dowels into the ends of the rolling pin, and that's going to give me the sturdiness that I need for the tray. I'm using no more nails to attach the two of these together. I'm using my finger to just put a generous amount of the no nails adhesive on the dowel and the rolling pin. Then I'll use some hot glue around the outside edge to just give it that extra hold while the no nails glue is drying. I did the same technique for the bottom tray, and now I'll just slide the top tray right on top of that dowel and hold it in place until the hot glue dries. Here's where you can see the little piece of dowel sticking up on the top tray, and that's why I painted it black. For some added security, I'm going to place a generous amount of hot glue around the dowel that's sticking out on the bottom pan. I am really happy with how my tray turned out. It is exactly how I envisioned it in my head. I hope you like it too. This next project I think will appeal to a lot of you out there. I'm going to show you how I take these two plates and make them into a tiered tray for less than $5. I found this wood piece. They came two in a pack for $2, so it was $1. And I took it and cut it into two separate pieces. I'm taking this Americana gel stain in walnut, and I'm going to just use the makeup sponge and wipe it on all of the wood pieces, making sure that I get into all the little cracks and crevices. It's going to blend in really well with these plates that I think are kind of a modern farmhouse kind of look. And I just bought the one set, but I have a feeling I'm going to be going back and getting another set of these plates because this is going to turn out really sweet. The easiest way for me to find the center is to take my wood piece, place it on the plate where I think the center is just by looking at it, and then I'm going to take my ruler and measure all the way around to make sure that I have it in the center, and it ends up being about 4¼ inches all the way around. Then I'm going to take my pencil and simply just draw a circle around the wood piece, so once I have the glue on, I can easily find the center. I'm using my favorite Weldbond permanent glue. You can see the bottle laying down there. I'm almost out of that one. And I'm going to just put a nice thick layer on and then just place it right onto the circle and let it set. I did the same thing for the top plate, and now I'm just filling in the little markings that don't have any stain in them with a little brush. After about 20 minutes, the Weldbond glue is pretty firm, so I'm able to go ahead and add glue to the bottom wood piece and then just set the smaller plate on top, eyeball it to make sure it's in the right spot, and then let it set up and harden. I'm starting off with the top tray. This is just a little wood tray that I picked up at my local dollar store. It had the word gather and some engravings in it, which I didn't like. You can see I did try to fill it with some spackle. That didn't work. So I'm just going to take these stakes that were also a local dollar store purchase. They're, I think, basswood or balsa wood. Anyhow, they're really easy to cut. So I'm just going to measure them down and cut them to fit the tray. Then I'll just attach them with some hot glue. I'm starting off the paint technique for this tray with a foundation of white. So I'm using Rust-Oleum Linen White chalk paint. This is my first time using folk art chalk paint. It's super thick, so if you want to make it go a little bit farther, you could probably thin it down with just a touch of water. I'm not going to need that because I'm just going to be doing my dry brush technique. And what I'm going to do is layer a bunch of different colors to achieve the look that I want. The dry brush technique that I like to use is just using a really old chippy brush that's seen better days. The rougher the better. And what I do is dip my brush in the paint just a little bit, dab it off, and I usually just use the bowl to do that. And then I'm going to brush across it in the direction of the wood grain. Now you can do it lightly, you can do it heavily. For this project, I am going to be doing it quite heavy, but you'll still be able to see the texture. So unfortunately, the next couple of steps I did miss recording because I have a brand new camera and I was hitting the button but not realizing that I was turning the button off instead of turning the button on. So anyway, what I did here was I used some black for dry brushing and then I used some brown to dry brush it a little bit darker. And then I found that it was too dark. So I liked how this looked, but I was looking for more of a lighter gray. So now I'm taking just a light gray color that I have and I'm just doing the same thing, dry brushing, just to give it a little bit of a lighter look. This is the bottom tray. It's also a dollar store find, and it's a little bit of a different shape, but it still has the same bones. And what I needed to do is just sand down these words and what I had done in a previous project that I no longer wanted, so I'm reusing what I have. I'll also give this a good coat of white paint and then I'll start with my colors dry brushing. Grabbed these two candlesticks from a thrift store and they've been in my stash for a while waiting for this tiered project to get itself together, and I'm finally doing it thanks to Nicole for her Get It Done challenge. And I just cut off the base of one of them because I won't need that. The next thing I'm going to do is just clean them up and then dry brush some paint on them. Now comes the best part, assembling my tiered tray. I want this to be permanent, so I'm using my Weldbond glue and I'm going to just put a little bit of glue on the bottom. This dries fairly quickly. It's not like E6000 where you need to let it cure for a while. This is pretty much good to go within about 15 or 20 minutes. So I really like how this glue works. It's my favorite one that I use. So I'm just pressing it down into the center and then I'm going to go ahead and add the next layer. For my first project, I'm using two sizes of the tumbling tower blocks. The small ones on the right are from the Dollar Tree. These that I'm showing you right now are from Dollarama. I love being able to have different sizes, and I also find a whole bunch of them at thrift stores. So if you're ever looking for the original Jenga blocks, go to the thrift store and check out their game section. I'm using the larger wood blocks for this project. And what I'm doing here is using my Weldbond glue, which I will have linked down in my description box, and a paintbrush to apply it. I have a really hard time squeezing the glue out of the bottle because I have arthritis in my thumbs, and that just makes it really difficult. So I like to just make it easy for myself and paint the glue on. I'm going to go ahead and put two together, and then I'm going to assemble more and more until I get a square the size that I want. What I love about the Weldbond glue is that it only takes a few minutes for it to actually take. It's not going to dry 100% in about 10 minutes, but it does dry enough that you can continue working with your project and you don't have to add any hot glue. I like working in sections like this, but you could also just have a ruler set up and then just glue one on top of each other and just continue until you get the size you like. I did set this aside for a little bit to fully dry, and now I'm going to be adding a stain to it. I'm just using burnt umber acrylic paint, and you saw me squirt some water in there. I'm just going to use one of my little brushes. I'm going to mix that together and then put it on just like a stain. I like this better than actually working with stains. I know I used some gel stains for a while, but I'm just loving the burnt umber look. And I also have espresso, and both of those paint colors I picked up at the Dollar Tree. When I'm doing furniture projects, I definitely work with the proper stains. So I would use something from Varathane or whatever else your hardware store has. But dark walnut in a stain is my favorite. So this burnt umber just works perfectly. I still have a bunch of spindles and bedposts left over from when I took a couple of beds apart. So what I'm doing here is just counting to make sure I know where the center is. I'm going to place it down and just use my pencil to draw a circle around it so I know exactly where to put the glue. Using the Weldbond glue again. This glue is amazing. It's for wood, glass, ceramic, tile, plastic, you name it, it's going to work with anything. And this is what I use for my tiered trays. I use this for putting wood together and then if I need to pin it or screw it in, but this is my go-to glue of choice. What you're looking at now is a jar of paint. I needed something heavy to pop on top of the bedpost so I could continue to work with it, but then it would have time to set with the glue. So something heavy on top is always a good idea. I'm just using the same mixture to go ahead and stain the bottom. When you're gluing items together, a good tip for you is to always glue the raw pieces together. So wood to wood, ceramic to ceramic, and then paint afterwards. You're just going to get a much stronger hold. What I'm going to do now is use this stencil to add some embellishments to the top of the riser. I cut this stencil out using my Cricut and I will have it available on my website. It's using plastic poster board. If you don't have a Cricut and you can't do something like this, but you'd like to, you could definitely use a stencil burner. They're about $20 to $25. I'll have a link for my stencil burner down in the description box. This stencil, along with many others, is also available on my website. So the link will be down in my description box. Go ahead and click on that, and you'll be able to see all of the stencils that I offer. For projects like this, when I just want to add a little bit of embellishment, I always use the stencil not full. So you can see that I just let it kind of hang off the one corner. And the reason I do that is because it makes it look more high end and professional. You don't always have to use the stencil in its full capacity. For example, here I'm only using the top portion of it, and then I will also add a little bit into the other corner as well. I wanted to give this a little bit of distressing, so I'm just using the same makeup sponge and I'm only loading it a tiny little bit with some paint, and I'm just going to dab it around the edge just to give this a little bit more of a rustic look. Here's where I added the other little bit. three more spindles that are a little bit longer and this wood round that I picked up at my local Dollarama. It was a sign. I sanded the paper off as much as I needed to. And now I'm going to use the same glue to pre-glue these in place. And I let them set for a good hour before I did anything else with them. Once I was able to flip it over without the little legs falling off, I used my nailer to hold it in place. Now, if you don't have a nailer, you could definitely pre-drill some holes and just add a screw. Make sure that you sink it below the level of the wood circle, because then you can just add a little bit of wood filler or some spackle and smooth out the top. So I'm back inside now, and this is what this stand or stool or whatever you want to call it, little mini table, looks like upside down with the spindles on. I am using some black paint, and this is Folk Art multi-surface paint. It's just what I happen to have on hand. It covers really, really well, but it doesn't stick to slick surfaces very well. So later on, when you see me working with this paint and another project, you're going to see some of the paint kind of come off the spindles because they still, of course, have all their varnish. But for this project, it's perfect. I'm going to go ahead and paint the whole thing, top and bottom, in black. Originally, I thought I was going to paint it all white and then distress it back to the black and some of the brown on the spindles, but I decided to change things up, and I'm just going to be painting the very top of this white. So in hindsight, I didn't need to paint the top of it black, but oh well, that's how it happens when you're crafting. Your mind kind of changes as you go. Once the paint was completely dry again, I am using a stencil for this. This is a French script stencil with some type of stamp on it, and I picked it up on Amazon. If I can find it again, I will link it for you down in my description box. And again, I'm just using a makeup sponge and some black paint, and I'm going to go ahead and stencil the whole thing on. And I think this turned out absolutely gorgeous. I really love this one. The second project I have for you, I think turned out amazing, but you'll have to let me know what you think. I'm taking two pieces of scrap wood and I've cut them in similar sizes, but of course, one smaller than the other. So the first thing I'm going to do is just give them a coat of my Rust-Oleum chalk paint in the color Cocoa Bean. I was lucky enough to score a beautiful bed frame on the side of the road, which I took apart, and I've got a whole bunch of different pieces, and that's what I'm going to use to create the tiered tray that I'm working with right now. I'm going to just put these two pieces together. They're going to become the top spindle of the tiered tray. So I'm just going to hot glue those together, and wood on wood with hot glue stands up really well. And then the other thing I'm going to do is glue a little half round wood bead to the top just to cover up the hole in this top piece. I gave the wood look area at the top of this piece a couple of coats of the cocoa bean chalk paint just so it would blend in a little bit more with the rest of it. I'm going to give both of these wood pieces two coats of a DIY chalk paint. It's just white flat latex house paint with some talc. And if you're interested in the recipe, I have it listed down in my description box. I usually mix up a big jug of it and then I'm set for quite a while before I have to make another batch. One thing I like to do is change the direction of my brush strokes on the second coat. That just helps to give me more even coverage. So I'll do a vertical stroke on the first one and then flip the board around and do another vertical stroke or a vertical and a horizontal stroke, however you want to call it. Just switch directions for your second coat and you'll get much better coverage that way. I've got 4 of these wood riser feet that are going to be the bottom of my tray, and I'm just going to pre-drill a hole for the screw. I'm going to do that for all 4 pieces, plus the middle section that's going to be the support for the top and the bottom. You'll want to have your drill bit a little bit smaller than the size of your screw because then it'll have some grip when you're screwing it in. Otherwise, it'll be too loose. I could have used a smaller one for this, so I did have to use a little bit of glue in a few spots to make sure that it would stay secure. To attach the riser feet, I'm going to be screwing from the top of the board all the way down through the board and then into the riser holes that I pre-drilled. So here I'm just marking out where I want them to be. I'm going to mark about an inch in from the side and the top, and then I'll have them set in the same spot in all four corners. I'm using a piece of scrap wood underneath my board to make sure that I don't drill into my desk, but also it will let me know when I'm all the way through the wood. I'm going to screw the screws in almost all of the way. I just want a little bit sticking out of the bottom so I have an easier way of getting it in the right hole on the riser feet. Then I can just place the riser foot right into the little part of the screw that is sticking out and finish screwing them together. I should have added a little bit of wood glue to all of these pieces because I did have one that was a little bit loose. So I would suggest doing that. Add a little bit of wood glue or some type of glue. I am always using my Weldbond glue, and that will just give you an extra secure hold. I'm also sinking the screws in a little bit farther down so they're really into the wood good and they don't stick out too much. I've flipped it over and now I'm starting from the bottom and putting a screw in through to the top because this will then support the middle spindle post that I need for the tray. It's really easy to get these two pieces together because I've got the pre-drilled holes in the spindle. I'm going to repeat the process for the top level of the tray, which is the smaller piece of wood. I'm going to put a screw right through it and then attach it to the spindle. Using a screwdriver, I'm just pulling away some of the paint on the very top level. I'm going to just use my Weldbond glue to glue the top spindle in place. The glue will be sufficient because there isn't any support needed for this. It's just a decorative piece. Using some fine grit sandpaper, I'm just going to sand around the edges and the corners of all the boards just to pull off some of that white paint and show the brown underneath. That's the reason why I painted it brown. I wanted that reveal to have a blending effect with the spindles because I'm leaving the spindles their brown color as well. I wanted to camouflage the screws on the bottom shelf, so I'm taking some of these half round beads and I'm staining them with a dark walnut gel stain. I'm going to add the beads just using hot glue and placing them right on top of the screw to hide it. I'm going to do the same thing on the top. I am over the moon in love with this tiered tray, and I think this one's definitely going to be a keeper. I hope you enjoyed my Timber Tuesday DIYs and got inspired to work with wood yourself. If you liked my video, please give me a thumbs up. That tells YouTube I'm starting this project with this medium-sized terracotta pot, and this was a Dollar Tree purchase. I think they come in a pack of 2. I'm going to paint this with my flat black chalk paint, and I'm going to give it 2 coats. One thing I like about painting terracotta is that it dries really quickly. So by the time I was all the way around with the 1 coat, the first coat was dry and I could just continue painting. I'm also going to paint the inside of this because I want it to look finished. For the second part of this project, I'm taking this bamboo tray that I got at my local Dollarama store. I thought it was really unique because it has rounded edges and a little lip on it. So it's not anything that I had seen before. I'm going to be just using some tape and taping off a section so I can paint that part of it black. I am even going to go up around the lip of it, but I'm not going to go underneath. Once I was done with that, I decided it need another little smaller stripe, so I'm going to tape that off and do the same thing. I don't know about you guys, but I still think that even after years of painting and using painter's tape and masking tape, the reveal is always the best part. Just seeing all of those nice crisp lines just makes it worthwhile. I've flipped the tray over and centered the pot, and I'm just going to make some small markings on all four corners of the pot. I know it doesn't have corners, but you know what I mean. And that's just going to give me the outline of where I can add my Gorilla Glue to be able to attach these two together. I let it cure overnight, and this is how it turned out. My first project is using Dollar Tree items. I have a couple of large burner covers, some of their beads, and I'm using Starbond medium consistency glue and this spray accelerator. What this glue does is amazing. It turns the glue into hard plastic. The medium consistency gives you some time to work with it, so it's like crazy glue or a super glue, but it doesn't actually dry as quickly. So what I'm going to do is put the glue on top of the burner cover where I want to put the beads. I'm going to set the beads down on top, make sure they're lined up where I want them, and then I'm going to take that accelerator and give it a good spray. So what I'm doing is spraying the glue. The glue is going to harden because of the accelerator properties, and it becomes rock hard in a matter of about 5 seconds. This glue is awesome. If you have never tried Starbond glue, you've got to give it a shot. I've got a link for you down in my description box. I'm going to continue this process all the way around the burner cover. I do end up using one full strand of these wooden beads from the Dollar Tree and about half a strand of another one. What I'm going to do now is flip the other burner cover over, and I'm going to be gluing that right on top of the beads. I'm going to use the Starbond glue again, but I'm going to do 4 beads on one side and 4 beads on the other side, just so I can control where I'm placing it. And because this medium consistency glue doesn't dry super fast, I've got a little bit of working time. So I'm just going to make sure that it's level and where I need it to be. And then I'll take that accelerator and give it a good spray on either side. Starting at one end where it's already glued, I'm going to add some of the glue underneath the beads. So I have a nice big blob in between the bead and the burner cover that is not stuck together. Then I'm going to hold it together, spray my accelerator, give it a gentle squeeze to make sure that the beads come in contact with the other burner cover. I'll repeat this process all the way around until it's completely glued down. I've also got one of these little tins that came from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to align it up into the center and then using my pencil draw a circle all the way around so I know exactly where to place the glue. I'm taking the Starbond glue and I'm still using the medium density, and I'm going to be following the pencil line. Then I'll put the pot right on top, and I'm actually putting the bottom side of the pot up instead of the other way round, as you can see here, because I want this to have a really neat modern farmhouse pedestal look. Then I'm just going to take that accelerator and spray it all the way around, and you can actually watch the glue harden and crystallize. It's a really neat process. So if you haven't tried Starbond glue yet, I would highly recommend it, especially if you're working with metal pieces. This is what it looks like so far, and now I'm going to take it outside to my garage and give it 2 coats of flat white spray paint. Here's the finished product as it's white, but now, of course, I'm going to have to do some distressing to it. I'm actually using this coastal blue color from Rust-Oleum. I've got one of those little paint pots. I don't use a lot of colors, so when I do want something a little different, I just stick to the small little pot instead of buying the liter. So I'm going to go ahead and give it some dry brushing. Now, these first pieces went on fairly thick, so I do end up going around it again with some white chalk paint and just kind of dulling that blue down a little bit. I'm sorry it's a little hard for you to see exactly what I'm doing, but it's dry brushing and I do it all the time on my channel. So I'm sure you guys are all familiar with how that technique works. If you've been here on my channel before, you've sure heard me talk about Pixabay and the amount of free images that you can use for DIY and decor. So I did find this sunflower image. It's a beautiful watercolor illustration. I printed it out on tissue paper and I'm just going to trim it down a little bit closer to the design. I'm going to apply a layer of Mod Podge, then I'll put the tissue paper sunflower on and then put another layer of Mod Podge on top, working from the center out to avoid any wrinkles or bubbles. To bring everything together, I'm going to use a makeup sponge and that same coastal blue chalk paint and go around the rims of both of the burner covers. This just makes everything go together really beautifully, and I absolutely adore how this one turned out.
This is a 24-inch massive tray. I love how big it is, and I think I'm going to use it as an ottoman tray. What I've done is made sure that all of my Jenga blocks fit. These are the original Jenga blocks with the numbers on the sides, but you won't see that once you've got it glued in. I'm just using hot glue, and I'm going to just place them all together end to end, making sure that they don't stick out past the round underneath. I did have to trim one a little bit, not by much. I just use a tiny little hacksaw that I have to do that, and it worked out perfectly. I'll just continue adding the hot glue and putting them in place all the way around, and this one is finished. I'm actually loving the way it looks. Just the natural wood color, because the wood round itself and the Jenga blocks are the perfect match.
For this project, I'm going to be using the larger size blocks. I think I got these at Walmart. This is the comparison of the Dollar Tree block to the original. I'm still using Aleene's tacky glue, and this time I'm going to be stacking them together long ways. So you can see here, I'm going to be doing 12 across. So I'll have 2 rows of 12, and then I'm going to do 2 rows of 4 glued end to end. Instead of gluing them separately, I'm just going to continue gluing right onto my original piece. So these 4 will go across and glued onto the bottom of the row of 12. Then I'm going to do another row of 4. Here's what it looks like so far. The last thing I'm going to do is add another row of the 12 vertical pieces. These blocks have numbers on the end that have a little bit of a bump to them. They're actually indented. So I'm going to use my dry deck spackle and put a thin layer all the way across. I'm using the same antique stain and water mixture to stain just this horizontal row in the center. I want to do something different with the vertical ones. With the antique wax, the more water you have, the lighter it is. And if you wanted to go over it a couple of times to deepen up the color, that's totally an option that you can do. The more layers you add, the darker the stain becomes. Because these are some pretty wood pieces and you can see the wood grain, I'm going to just whitewash the rest of the tray. I just used a little bit of my white latex paint and added some water. You can see it's there in the bowl. And I'm going to go over probably a couple of times. I wanted to have a nice deep white color. Well, not necessarily deep, but I wanted it to look white because the first layer they turned kind of pinkish because of the tone of the wood. So I went over twice and sometimes in a few areas 3 times just to give a really nice bright whitewashed look. I'm going to use these little wooden car wheels as my feet for this tray. I'm going to hot glue them into the 4 corners, but I'm also going to then add another layer. I want these to be 2 high. To create handles for the tray, I'm using 4 of these little square cubes that I picked up at the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to glue them a little bit further in. You can see where I'm putting it there, kind of right on the seam of the first and second block. I'm going to put one on either side of the brown stained blocks, and then I'm going to glue another tower block right on top. And I'm going to have the tower block sticking out a little bit, so it's going to be flush on one end of the blocks, and then it's going to be sticking out on the other end. I stained the handles with the same antique wax and water mixture, and I did the feet. And now I'm just going along the outside edge here where I put the spackle on. I wanted there to be a little bit more contrast and just make it look a little bit more rustic. So what I'm doing with my finger here is just going to the top and taking some of that antique wax and just rubbing it over the edge so it looks a little more distressed. I came upon this a little bit by accident because some of the wax had actually bled to the top and I tried to rub it off, but then I liked how it looked, so I continued to do that. I have a second project for you today that I think you're going to love. But first, I want to introduce you to my new friend. This is a Ryobi table saw. It was a gift to myself for Mother's Day and for my birthday, which was just last week. And I love it. I am so in love with this guy. It is so easy to use. You just put your wood through it, it cuts it just like butter. I don't have to hang on to any heavy tools. I don't have to try and get a straight line. It just works perfectly. What I've done here is cut some pallet boards to the length that I need. I get pallets from a building supply center not far from my home, and my husband is kind enough to use his Sawzall to just cut them down for me. The only thing I'm going to do now is just trim these little pieces that are going to be my support pieces for a tray that I'm creating. Pallet wood is super dry, so I always recommend that you pre-drill your holes before you put your screws in. If you don't pre-drill, and trust me, I've done this a gazillion times, I've skipped this step and then the wood cracks and splits and then I've got to start over. So just make sure that if you're using pallet wood or any type of wood, it's really easy to pre-drill first and then your screws go in really nicely. Before I put this piece together, I want to make sure that I use my sander and just get everything nice and smooth. Pallet wood is really rough. That's one of the disadvantages of it, is because it's not used for nice things. And so you want to make sure that you get all of those little splinters and rough edges off. Another tip I can give you is to put your screws in first before you attach it to the other pieces. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to put my screws in and I'm going to let them stick out just a wee bit on the other side, and then it'll be easier for me to match up the holes. I've got the holes matched up and now it's super easy just to screw everything together. Now I'm going to stain it using Varathane Gel Stain in Dark Walnut. I love the dark walnut color and I love using gel stain. It's so easy to use. I've had this leader for a really long time and it lasts forever as long as you make sure that the seal is good. I'm going to apply it just using an old rag. This is a really soft t-shirt that I cut up into little pieces to use specifically for this. So again, I'm going to use a doggy poop bag and cover my hands so I don't get the stain all over the place. I'm just rubbing it in and I'm going to make sure that I don't put too much on. I want it to be nice and even. You can see how the stain is bringing out the texture of the wood. Each piece is different and unique and it just looks beautiful. Now that the stain is dry, I've got to add some handles. And I went rummaging around in my goodie bags and I found these old metal pieces. I really don't know what they're for. Whenever we have an old piece of furniture that we take apart, I always make sure to keep the parts. So I really honestly don't know what this is for, but I thought they would make really cool handles. I've just marked the spots where the holes are. I'm going to pre-drill and then screw them in. I'm going to be putting some words on the tray, and I decided to start off by using my fine tipped paint pen, and I thought I could just outline the letters with the stencil, but the paint bled. Of course, it's a paint pen, so I don't know what I was thinking. So what I've decided to do is just freehand the rest of the letters using the stencil font as my guide. The words I'm putting on here are grillin', chillin', and refillin'. So grilling the meat, chilling out while it cooks, and refilling the drinks. And I thought that was really cute. So what I'm doing is starting at the end of the word and working my way backwards. I want all of the ends of these words to line up in the same spot, so that's why I'm going backwards. I ended up adding a spatula and the rest of the letters. Unfortunately, I lost that footage, but look at how cute this guy turned out. I just love him.